All right, so Come Follow Me is the title of the message, and we'll just begin with, I guess, this question. Who are you following? We're all following someone or something. The question isn't, am I a disciple, but rather, who or what am I a disciple of? The world tells us that we are the captain of our own ships. Yeah? But let's be real, how's that working out for us? You guys captained your own ship? Do you ever feel a tug at you saying, is this it? Is this the depth of life? Here's the truth. No one truly is independent. We're all shaped by something: social media, influencers, ads, politics, the culture around us. The world is constantly forming us, right? But what is it forming us into? In his book, Practicing the Way, pastor, teacher, and author John Mark Comer, one of my favorite authors, writes, if we're not being intentionally formed by Jesus, we're being unintentionally formed by someone or something else. And so to this, the question still remains. Who are you following? My alarm went off, I think it was 2 a.m., pulling up, welcoming me into the chill of the desert night. About 2:30, our group of 100 or so gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai. It was looming overhead. We rode camels for about 2 hours. Let me tell you, that's not super comfortable. I've ridden some comfortable camel seats. This one was a one-person, 2 horns, no stirrups, so I couldn't push myself up. It wasn't very comfortable. However, there was something about riding a camel for 2 hours through a starlit desert night there with Mount Sinai before us, and it was pretty surreal. When the trail grew too steep, we dismounted, climbing on foot for another hour or so. At the top, the first light of dawn stretched over the horizon, transforming the desert into a masterpiece of gold and pink. As I sat among the rocks, the sacredness of the place and the day, it happened to be the Day of Atonement. For those of you who don't know, this was a very significant day within Jewish history, and in the story of God, one where God makes all things right. And provides a way forward for man's sin. So the sacredness of the place and the day really just washed over me. Life's memories were passing before me. My upbringing in a Christian home. The prodigal son experiences that I've had, the losses, longings, and chaos of life that I've experienced, the healing and transformation that I was experiencing personally and in the relationships around me. And in the stillness of the dawn, I was overwhelmed by the sense of God's presence in my life and how rooted my story was in God's story. It was a pretty special moment. In the fall of last year, I had the opportunity to take a trip to Egypt and Israel, which was pretty amazing. There I am on, I don't know the name of the camel, but pretty cool camel with the pyramids. Was able to go to the Wailing Wall, Temple Mount. I don't know if this was actually the Garden of Gethsemane, but this was called the Garden of Gethsemane. So, just to think on these places, right? These rich, historical, biblical places. Each place we visited, there was a deep connection with God's story, reminding me of His deliverance and His faithfulness, His desire to dwell with me, and ultimately the sacrifice for my redemption. The Sea of Galilee was one of my favorite places. Probably the Mount Sinai and the Sea of Galilee was the 2 highlights for me. It was cool to be able to ride on the boat. David Asherick happened to be there leading the tour, and hearing stories about Jesus on the Sea of Galilee was very rich, right? Yeah, there's me just taking it in. I don't know. So, do you guys think of any stories from the Sea of Galilee? Anything come to mind when you think of the Sea of Galilee? Walking on water? Calm in the storm. Anybody else? Say it again? Pigs. Somewhere in the Sea of Galilee, there's some pigs. All right. Yeah. The one that comes to mind for me, there's a number. I agree with all of those. The one that comes to mind for me and that I think is applicable to what I'm sharing today is Jesus calling his disciples. And here in Mark 1:17, Jesus says, "Come follow me." Imagine you're Andrew, a fisherman in Galilee. Your days all look the same: casting nets, hauling them in, fixing the tares. The smell of fish cling to you, your clothes, the sun beats down on your back. No matter how hard you work, it feels like it's never enough. This is life. Fishing, paying taxes, surviving, rinse and repeat. Dreams? You don't have time for those anymore. Then one day everything changes. You're by the shore with your brother Simon, mending a torn net. The morning's catch was small, and frustration gnaws at you. Suddenly you hear a voice. Andrew. You look up. It's him, the rabbi everybody's been talking about, Jesus of Nazareth. You've heard the stories. He heals the sick. He speaks with authority that shakes people to the core, and now he's standing here, looking directly at you. His eyes feel like they can see straight through your doubts, your fears, and your quiet longing for something more. Then he says it. Come, follow me. You freeze. Follow him? You're just a fisherman. What could he possibly want with you? The doubts flood in. What about the boat, the nets, the family business? What about your father who's counting on you to keep things running? And deep down, there's another voice, the one that's haunted you for years. You're not good enough for this. But Jesus doesn't explain. He doesn't plead. He just waits. And in the silence, something stirs inside of you. You look at Simon, and you can see the same question in his eyes. What if this is real? You glance back at the nets in your hands and the life you know, predictable and safe. And then you look at Jesus. His invitation isn't about logic or guarantees. It's about trust. And for the first time in years, you see a flicker of hope. A different kind of life. A life with him actually feels possible. So you do it. You drop your net and you follow. As we imagine Andrew standing by the boat hearing Jesus say, "Come follow me," it's easy to think about his immediate response. But to truly grasp the weight of that moment, we need to step back and look at the cultural norms of Andrew's time. Why was Jesus' invitation so extraordinary? What made it so radical that Andrew would drop everything to follow him? To answer that, we need to understand how discipleship worked in the first century Jewish world. I'm going to play a short video from the Practicing the Way course. So this is, again, John Mark Comer, who wrote the book Practicing the Way. He has a course, and this will explain the cultural context of discipleship in first century way better than I could. This video is a little over 3 minutes, so please keep focused because I have some questions when it's done. You guys ready? All right.
In first century Israel, you would regularly see rabbis walking along the road or teaching at your village synagogue. The word rabbi means master or teacher. Rabbis were the revered teachers, not just of the Torah or the Bible of their day, but of life with God. Most of them were itinerant. They would travel from place to place to teach, and behind them would be a small group of students called talmidim. The Hebrew word talmid literally means learner, but it can also be translated student or follower. The most common translation is disciple, but a growing number of scholars argue the best word we have in the English language to capture the full meaning of the Hebrew word talmid is apprentice. The philosophy of education in the ancient world was nothing like ours in the modern West, where you go to class, sit through a lecture, and take notes for a test. It wasn't informational, it was formational. The goal wasn't just to learn about something, but to become someone. And discipleship, or apprenticeship, was the pinnacle of the first century Jewish educational system. Jewish kids started school around 5 years old at the Beit Sefer, or the House of the Book, which was the equivalent of elementary school. The primary textbook was the Bible, but it was an oral culture, and by the age of 12 or 13, most students would have memorized the entire Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. At that point, the vast majority of students went home to apprentice in the family business or work the family farm. But the best of the best would go on to a second level of education called Beit Midrash, or the House of Learning, where they would continue their studies. It was built off the side of the synagogue and run by a full-time scribe or teacher. By the age of 17, they would have memorized the entire Old Testament. At this point, the vast majority were done. But the best of the best of the best would go on to apprentice under a rabbi. Let's say you were one of the lucky few who became an apprentice to a rabbi. From that point on, your entire life was organized around 3 driving goals. First, to be with your rabbi. You would leave your family and your village and follow your rabbi 24/7. Apprenticeship was deeply relational. You would walk behind your rabbi on the road, eat every meal with them, keep Sabbath together, be with them all day long. Secondly, to become like your rabbi. The heart and soul of apprenticeship was to be with your rabbi for the purpose of becoming like your rabbi. You would imitate their whole life, copy their mannerisms, adopt their figures of speech. You wanted to be like them. Finally, to do as your rabbi did. The goal of apprenticeship to a rabbi was to one day become a rabbi yourself. And if you made it through the long process of apprenticeship, then when your rabbi felt you were ready, he would turn to you and say something like, "Okay, I think it's time. Go and make disciples." This was what it meant to be a disciple. And this is still what it means to be a disciple.
All right. Was that pretty cool? Very succinct. I don't think I really understood things this way. When I saw this video, it was very helpful. And does it helpful in the context of Jesus' encounter with his disciples? Perhaps what they were thinking? Because they had gone through this probably to learn the Torah, did they make it past that, or did they return to be fishermen at that point? Did they go beyond that? And so there was these spaces of potential rejection that they may have felt. I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough to have somebody ask me to follow them as a rabbi. So here you have Jesus coming and breaking the norm. This is a radical invitation that he had. So what does it mean to follow Jesus today? Fast forward 2024, we're ending 2025. It's the same framework from ancient discipleship. To follow Jesus means to organize your life around 3 goals. Does anybody remember the first goal? To be with Jesus, right? To be with Jesus, to be in his presence. The first goal of apprenticeship is simply to be with Jesus. When Jesus called his disciples, he didn't just teach them a weekly lecture. I don't know if this is a lecture. I'm not a lecturer, but they lived with him. They walked with him. They ate with him. They laughed with him. They rested with him. For us, this means cultivating a relationship with Jesus in everyday lives. It means learning to live in constant connection with Jesus, spending time with him through prayer, scripture, and silence. Philosopher, theologian, and author Dallas Willard put it this way: the first and most basic thing that we can do is to keep God before our minds. Soon our minds will return to God as the needle of a compass constantly returns to the north. If God is the great longing of our souls, he will become the pole star of our inward being. Doesn't that sound beautiful? To live in such a close friendship with Jesus that your heart naturally turns to him like a compass pointing north. It can't not turn to him. It's a beautiful thought. But that doesn't just happen on its own, does it? It takes intentionality. Perhaps it takes practice. All right, goal number 2, become like Jesus. Transformation. The second goal of apprenticeship is to become like Jesus. This is the heart of discipleship, transformation. Jesus wants to reshape us from the inside out so that we can think, speak, and act like him. Again, this doesn't happen overnight. In the book of Luke, Jesus says, everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. Notice the word trained. Spiritual formation is a process. It takes time, consistency, and grace. Imagine if you were to become more like Jesus every day, more loving, joyful, patient, and kind. Imagine if your life radiated his peace and presence in every situation. This is possible, but it requires surrender. I have to let go of my pride, my selfishness, my desire to control. I have to let him reshape my life, my character through his Spirit. And the third goal of being an apprentice today is do as Jesus did. This has a missional connection. Jesus told his disciples, follow me and I will send you out to fish for people, right? The extension of that verse. In other words, he was training them to join his mission. To follow Jesus is to participate in his work of healing, serving, and sharing the good news of God's kingdom. It means using my gifts and resources to bless others. Think about it. If you were an apprentice to a plumber, any plumbers out there? I'm looking at you, Jimmy. I can plumb, not my job. If you're an apprentice to a plumber, the goal wouldn't be to learn about plumbing. Wouldn't it actually be to plumb a house? In the same way, the goal of following Jesus isn't to know about him. Well, that's part of it. It's also to join him in his mission of love. Okay, tough question. This one hurts for me when I think about it. Is it possible to be a Christian but not an apprentice of Jesus? This one stings me. I'm speaking for myself. Is it possible? Studies show that 63% of Americans self-identify as Christians. Anybody want to take a guess at the number that identify as followers of Jesus? 4%. The gap reveals something important. It is possible to call ourselves Christian, but miss the heart of discipleship, actively apprenticing under Jesus. Following Jesus isn't about believing in him necessarily. It's about living like him. True discipleship means reordering my life around his presence, his transformation, and his mission. Am I content in identifying as a Christian, or will I take the next step to truly follow Jesus? When considering the invitation to follow Jesus, it may be helpful to establish that Jesus is a rabbi worth following. I don't know if you guys are considering that, but it's helpful. As we learned in the first century Jewish world, a rabbi isn't just a teacher of knowledge. A rabbi invited disciples into a way of life. To follow a rabbi meant to live as they lived, adopt their values, and embrace their vision of a good life. So what set Jesus apart from other rabbis? I got 4 points I'm just going to highlight. His invitation was radically inclusive. Unlike the elite rabbis of his time, who only chose the best of the best, Jesus called fishermen and tax collectors and sinners. He didn't look out for the most qualified, but he qualified. Have you guys heard it? Qualified the called? Right? This means his invitation to follow isn't based on our achievements or status. Thank you, Jesus. It's based on his love and his belief in our potential. Number 2, Jesus offers a vision of life that satisfies our deepest belongings. We live in a world where people are searching for meaning, purpose, and identity, and Jesus cuts through that noise and says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Following him is not about adding more to our to-do lists, but about finding rest, freedom, and transformation. In Jesus' time, this is a little bit of a sidebar. In Jesus' time, a yoke wasn't just used for farming. I think we're familiar with the yoke being for farming, for ox to pull a heavy plow. You may have one ox pulling the whole thing. You may have 2 oxes that are pulling, and they share the weight, right? But it's also a common metaphor used by Jewish rabbis. I don't know if you guys knew this. A rabbi's yoke is referred to their way of interpreting the Torah and teaching others how to live it out. So when Jesus invites us to take on his yoke, he's not talking necessarily about heavy burdens, while that's part of it. He's inviting us to live his way. A way that honors God and brings peace to our lives. It's an entirely new way of being human, aligned with the rhythm of God's kingdom. Today, we may carry many burdens. Here are some of mine. A yoke of achievement, the need to prove my worth by success. A yoke of perfection, the pressure of being flawless or appearing flawless. The yoke of busyness, this is a big one for me. The belief that my value comes from productivity. The yoke of comparison, constantly measuring myself against others. And yet these yokes leave me tired, anxious, and burned out. And Jesus offers me a better way. He offers us a better way, his yoke, his way of life. It's not about stress or striving, but about learning to walk in step with him, a way that's easy, light, and full of rest. Point 3 here. Jesus' way leads to true life. So often, the things I follow, whether it's success or social media trends or personal ambition, leave me feeling restless and empty. But Jesus declared, "I have come that you may have life and to have it full." His teachings on forgiveness, humility, generosity, and love are not just lofty ideals. They are practical steps toward a life of abundance and peace. And finally, number 4, Jesus isn't a rabbi with wisdom. He is the Son of God. Amen. He is God himself. He is love personified. His way is the way of love. And as Christians, we're called to love God and to love others. And if we don't know his way, we are unable to love God and love others. So can we follow God? Can we be a Christian without being a follower of Jesus? I think the call is connected. When Jesus teaches as the Son of God, it's not just good advice, it's divine truth. So is Jesus a rabbi worth following? Absolutely. He calls us not just to learn about him, but to become like him, to live a life of hope, joy, and purpose in his kingdom. The question is, will I trust him enough to follow? Will I apprentice under the rabbi who holds the words of eternal life? It's not easy to follow Jesus. It comes at a cost, yeah? And I think it's biblical that we're invited to consider the cost of the things that we choose to tie ourselves to. In Matthew 16:24, Jesus says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." For Simon and Andrew, the cost was leaving their nets, their livelihood, and their families. For us, it might be letting go of the yokes of comfort, security, and control. It might mean stepping out of our routines or surrendering habits that don't honor God. Here's the paradox about the gospel. The cost of following Jesus is nothing compared to the cost of not following him. Not following Jesus means missing out on a life that you were created for, that I was created for, a life with God filled with his love, his peace, and his purpose. When we say yes to Jesus, we step into the greatest experience of our lives. It's a journey of transformation, intimacy, and purpose that changes everything. Jesus describes in Matthew 13:44, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all that he had and bought that field." This is what it means to follow Jesus. I give up my old life, my misplaced priorities, my own way, but in return I gain a life filled with joy and peace and meaning, and I find a treasure worth far more anything that I give up. The joy that comes from knowing that you are loved by God, walking in his presence, and living with purpose that echoes through eternity, this is life that is truly life. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. The joy of apprenticeship to Jesus is finding that treasure and knowing it's yours. Okay, so let me leave you with one last picture to consider. Imagine you're standing in a dirt field. At first glance, it seems ordinary, just soil and rocks. But beneath the surface lies something extraordinary, a treasure hidden and waiting to be uncovered. Now picture this, you sell everything and buy that field, and over time, with care and effort, the field transforms. You cultivate it, plant seeds, and nurture it. The barren ground becomes a lush vineyard, bursting with fruit, grapes, rich with sweetness and life. This is what it means to follow Jesus. At first, his call might seem costly or unclear, but when you trust him, you discover the treasure of life with him. He takes the ordinary and he makes it extraordinary. He transforms barren places into places of abundance. In John 14:6, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Following Jesus isn't just about finding a better way to live, it's about finding the only way to live a life that truly matters. He is the way that leads to eternal life, the truth that sets us free, and the life that fills us with purpose. So as we return to the invitation, come follow me, I ask you, will you trust him enough to step into the field? will you let him lead you into the treasure of life with him, a life that grows and flourishes and bears fruit for his kingdom?